What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to introduce myself. And I just want to welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to moderate the innovations of pediatric liver transplantation. My name is Jennifer Lau, and how I am connected to transplant is that my son was born with biliary atresia and transplanted at 9 months old. He received a living donor donation and is now 10 and doing great. And we are forever blessed and thankful for our living donor for our son. And now I'm going to actually give you some information on our presenters. We have great presentations this morning. Dr. Emily Perito is from University of California, San Francisco. We have Dr. Beau of Stanford Children's Health and is part of the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation. And then we also have Eric Pahl, a data analyst at OmniLife and with the Starzl Network. So without further ado, I would like to kick this session off. Our first presenter will be Dr. Emily Perito.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. Thanks, Jen, for the introduction. My name is Emily Perito. I'm a pediatric liver doc at UCSF. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about Learning Together in Partner, which stands for Patient-Centered Research in Transplant, Engaging Families and Recipients. And I'm really presenting on behalf of a team, which includes Jennifer Lau, who you just heard from, as well as Melissa McQueen, who's the head of Transplant Families, Joseph Hillenberg, who's also helping moderate this session, and some other providers, including Jim Squires, George Mazariegos, and CJ Confair from Pittsburgh. And this is really an effort of Transplant Families and the Starzl Network together, and a really exciting collaboration that we're going to tell you more about today. So what is the Starzl Network? We are the first multi-center effort by pediatric liver transplant families and providers to develop shared priorities and a shared agenda for innovation in clinical care. And this really started with a meeting a few years ago where we sat down together with providers from many of the centers that you see here. We've had some additional joins since then, as well as families who've gone through transplant at that center. And we, talked through together, what are your priorities? What do we need to improve and fix in pediatric liver transplant? And over the last few years, we've worked together on how we can do that effectively. And we've set the Starzl Network up as a learning health system. It's the first learning health system in pediatric liver transplant. And we really aim to integrate quality improvement, research management, and patient care, working towards this goal of every patient receiving the right care at the right time, every time they have to make a treatment decision. That's a big goal, obviously, but something we're really committed to and looking and enjoying working towards together. And the mission of the Starzl Network is to unite big data, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Eric in a few minutes, technology, patient advocates, and transplant thought leaders to deliver the best care and develop new scalable solutions to pediatric liver transplantation's most challenging problems. Oops. One way that we're working towards doing this is with a engagement award, a capacity building engagement award that we were awarded from what's called PCORI, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And the goal of this is to really get the Starzl Network and transplant families together, ready to do a new kind of research that's called patient-centered outcomes research in pediatric liver transplant. So the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute funds research that provides patients, caregivers, and clinicians with evidence-based information needed to make better informed healthcare decisions. And they really believe that every step of the research, this starts with thinking about the research question, designing the project, and then all the way through implementing and sharing the results, needs to be a collaboration between providers, patient partners, and other stakeholders. Not where we come to you and say, hey, families, this is the project we're doing. Do you want to sign up, yes or no? But where we really sit down at the table together and think from the beginning about what should we be doing? What questions are important? How are we going to answer this? And design studies that are feasible and interesting for families to participate in. And what PCORI gave us to start with is called a Capacity Building Engagement Award. It's a 2-year grant. And the goal is really to build the knowledge and abilities of the community, which includes patient partners who are families that have been through transplant, as well as transplant recipients themselves, and providers and other stakeholders to be meaningful partners through the patient-centered outcomes research process. The goals of this project are to help all members of our Starzl network and the pediatric transplant community learn about what patient-centered outcomes research is and how to do it, to get feedback from all those stakeholders about how we can do this kind of work in the Starzl network together with transplant families. And then together, really, the ultimate goal of this is working towards improving the lives of pediatric transplant recipients, including those that you know and love. And the sort of concrete thing that's going to come out of this is a roadmap, which I'll show you the first section of actually in a few minutes, to help us think about what questions do we need patient-centered outcomes research answers to? How can we include all stakeholders in this process? And what should these projects really look like within the Starzl network? This is a schematic of what the actual work of the grant looks like. And so we have 6 educational modules that are paired with a feedback survey. We've launched 3 of them so far, and we have 3 more to go. The leads of the project are coming up with that education based on some educational materials that PCORI has provided. We have an advisory board that helps us pilot these modules and test them out to see if they're readable and understandable and interesting. And then we've been pushing out the modules with the survey to lots of different folks. Hopefully you guys have seen some of these already. If you haven't, we're going to show you how to participate at the end. We're taking all of that survey material back and analyzing what people are telling us. And then we are digging a little bit more into the survey results with focus groups, as well as sharing back stuff with our advisory board to get recommendations about how do we really finalize this survey that we're sending out to all sorts of stakeholders in the community to come up with real guidelines for how we're going to do patient-centered outcomes research projects in the Starzl network. And so we're working towards these 5 different sections of the roadmap, really, again, as a guide for setting up these projects going forward. This is what the modules look like. We've partnered with an app, a company that has an app called Real Time Clinic. It's a free app and is designed for lots of different things, but one of the things it's designed for is patient and family education. And so we built these modules, these educational modules with the feedback surveys into the app. We actually also now have an internet version that we'll show you just for ease of accessibility. And you go into their curriculum and start the module. And it gives you information about what we do and what patient-centered outcomes research is. This is examples from a couple of the different things. There's videos to make it a little bit more interesting. And then there's a feedback survey that asks questions like, to do research that's really meaningful to us, what should we do? Or what are the most important questions that we need to answer or issues we need to address to improve the lives of children with liver transplants? So who have we learned from so far? Well, as I mentioned before, we've launched 3 of our learning feedback modules in the Real Time Clinic app and now on the internet as well. We have received responses from 119 patient partners and 78 providers from about 15 transplant centers over these 3 modules. We've held focus groups in which we've talked to 25 patient partners and 14 providers to really kind of try to make sure we're understanding the feedback that we're getting and really identify themes and key messages. And we're really excited that we just were able to have our first focus group in Spanish. And so that's something that we'd like to continue to do to really try to be inclusive and bring in folks from, again, all different communities that are going through transplants with their families. And so we're looking forward to having more conversations like that. What have we learned so far? So, you know, we started by asking just what people's experience is with research in the past. And what I'm showing you today are responses from the patient partners that we've worked with. We also have a parallel set of surveys and responses from the transplant providers, which includes not just the docs, but the nurses, your nurse coordinators, your nurse practitioners, your social workers, your mental health support, and even the administrators that work with transplant teams. So of the participants in our first module, about 3/4 said their child had participated in research before. But something really important that we learned that probably will not surprise you, but I think is important from our perspective to really remember, is that the vast majority of those patients had never, or families, if their child did participate in a research study, never found out about the study results. And of those who did find out about the study results, most of them did not hear back because the study team like proactively shared the results with them. And so this is one thing that we'd really like to reverse in patient-centered outcomes research, where if it's something that you agree to participate in, then you really have ongoing interactions all the way through, and we follow up with you about here's what we learned and here's how it's going to change, what we do to take care of kids with transplants. We asked, why would you do this? What's the number one reason that parents or children decide to enroll in a research study? And I'm showing you here the answers from providers on top and patient partners on the bottom. And the number one reason for most in both groups is to help future children or families in the same situation, but also to help your own child's health, life or health. And so really making sure that, again, we're thinking about both things when we're asking people to sign up for a research study is something that's going to be a big focus of ours going forward. We also asked, what's the number one reason that you decide not to enroll in a research study if somebody asks you? And for both providers and patient partners, but particularly important for patient partners, the idea that it probably wouldn't help their own child's health or life. So that's something that's really important to address in these projects. Patient-centered outcomes research projects really need to be clear about how they're going to be helpful, either to your child or future children. Being worried that it would hurt or upset the child, or extra visits or procedures being too much, were, again, like big reasons that folks decided not to enroll in a research study. And so this is, again, is where patient-centered outcomes research can be really exciting and innovative, where the goal is to sit down with patient partners and families when we're designing what the research study looks like to make sure that we're avoiding some of these barriers and really asking families ahead of time, how would this be for you? How could we make it easier for you? And integrating those things into the way that the study looks. So with questions like that and others, we've started to come up with this roadmap for patient-centered outcomes research in the Starzl network. This is just an example of the guiding principles, where we pulled out of that first set of feedback 3 really key messages that we were hearing from stakeholders. One is the importance of sharing back information and making sure people understand exactly what they're participating in, what we're trying to accomplish, and then what happened. Improving the transplant journey was another key message, really making sure that everybody's thinking about how is this going to help the children that we're taking care of now and the children we're taking care of in the future, and really making sure that that's a driving principle of any study that we do. And then this theme of inclusive partnership. How, does this project really prioritize the priorities of families and patients? And how are we including those folks in the whole design and implementation of the project? So when we're thinking about a patient-centered outcomes research project in the future in the Starzl network, these are the kind of questions that we would expect a study team to be able to answer. When they're, asking, does your network and the centers in your network want to participate in a study, is really, are you coming up with answers to these questions that are meaningful to families? We also asked who are the key stakeholders in our patient-centered research about pediatric liver transplant. I think the answers you see here probably won't be surprising to you, but just really important in terms of keeping us centered going forward in this kind of work is to make sure that any project we're thinking about really holds patients front and center, and then includes all sorts of folks, including families. Coordinators is a really important thing that we heard from folks, other caregivers in the family, and parents. And so again, this is something that in terms of keeping us centered will go into this roadmap and help us think about how to do this kind of work successfully in the Starzl network. We asked the patient partners, what could the research team do to help you feel like a true partner in a patient-centered outcomes research project? And these are answers from our second module. And I just put the themes here as well as some quotes from parents. Thinking about opportunities to interact throughout the process of the project with the research team and with other parents. Making the interaction ongoing, as I mentioned before, not just hearing once, yes, I'll sign up, and then never hearing again what happens, but getting feedback as you go through. Acknowledging and valuing experience and listening to caregiver concerns is really important. Just as we do in clinical care, we need to do this in patient-centered outcomes research as well. And then really being transparent and following through, especially on how the research project will change care. We asked about what are the biggest barriers to you or other transplant families being a partner in this kind of patient-centered research. And the blue shows what people listed as their number one barrier, and the yellow things that in their top like 4 to 5 they listed. So really lack of knowledge and skills about research. Most families are not formally trained in this, but a big part of partner is educating folks and providing these educational modules you can go back to make sure that folks feel like they have a good grounding in what this kind of work is and how they can contribute. Again, making sure that we're setting projects up so that everybody's opinion is respected and listened to. Trying to make it so that it's not too much time and that time really feels valuable and compensated. And then making sure that it's going to help either, your own child or other kids with transplants. This is not meant to be read all of it, but just in terms of asking what can we do to overcome these barriers to participation, we got really, really great, very concrete ideas from families about what we can do to really overcome these barriers. And so these are the kind of things that in our next section of the roadmap, we're going to be working in really concrete suggestions about how we can make participation and help with design really feasible for families. I wanted to just highlight these 2 quotes as well in terms of biggest barriers to you or other transplant families being partners in this kind of work, involving parents in an equitable manner, regardless of socioeconomic status, and recognizing that engagement may be easier for the privileged. And so these are, I think really important messages that we heard back from stakeholders that we're really trying to think about how we can honor and do better at being inclusive with these kind of projects as we go forward. So I think this is going to be a really big and important challenge for us as we go forward. That's all I have to share. The project right now is particularly for liver transplant families or providers and focused on those priorities. So if that is you and you are interested in participating, I think hopefully Jen or Joseph, maybe you could post this link in the chat. And I can try to help with that as well. You're welcome to email us. You can also find some of our preliminary results on the internet. And our hope with transplant families in the future is that we can extend this eventually to other types of solid organ transplant as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Emily. And as she had said, we'll post that link in the chat for those that may be interested in helping and participating. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat throughout the presentations, and then we can have some time afterwards to help answer any kind of questions. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Perito. Our next speaker is Dr. Beau from Stanford Children's Health and Split, the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Hey there, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly. Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I've had some technical stuff going on this morning, so I just want to make sure that people can hear me. Let me just pull this up here real quick. Give me 2 seconds here. My apologies. Of course, as I go to get this set up for today, the neighbors decided I wanted to work from my home office because my internet is more stable than being interrupted in my other office. And so, of course, as I do that, my neighbors decide they're going to embark on some crazy outdoor project of mowing lawns and doing all kinds of stuff. So my apologies for being a little slow here. I assume you're not able to see any presentation there yet.
Not quite yet. Do you have screen share by chance?
I did that, and it's in the process. It says on my side that it's uploading.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so my apologies for that.
All right. While we're waiting, I mean, if you want,
open,
you can tell us
open to all. Tell you a joke.
Yeah, tell us a joke.
this day, that's my joke.
We can swap the sequence if we need to.
Yeah, you want to do that? My apologies.
Yeah, we'll let
me
Eric
make
go.
sure that.
That? Okay.
That'd be great. I see it. It's saying it's uploading, but I'm not confident that it's actually doing that. So, Eric, if you don't mind jumping in, I'd appreciate it.
Of course. Nice to see you.
Hi, Eric. How are you? I will introduce you then as the data analyst at the Starzl Network and informatics fellow at University of Iowa and researcher officer at OmniLife. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to present some of our work in collaboration with the Starzl Network. Great. I think you guys can see my screen now. I sure can on my side. Thanks again for joining and selecting the Innovation for Pediatric Liver Transplant session today. I've already been introduced, but that's me over there on the left. And then on the last slide, I'll have contact information if you guys have any questions that we're not able to answer during the session today. I'd be happy to connect with you guys for that. I have the pleasure of introducing a collaborative project called Transplants for Kids. And it's some work that we've done together with the Starzl Network, the University of Iowa Artificial Intelligence Initiative, and OmniLife to bring about some machine learning into organ offer and graft selection decision-making in liver transplant. I'll tell you all about that in the preceding slides. First off, excuse me, we are having a pending awarded grant from the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. This is relevant because it's a large amount of financing to prove out the technical feasibility of using machine learning algorithms in pediatric liver transplantation. There's been some prior work and effort in adults, but there hasn't been the focus that we needed on our kids. And I think that's why we're all here today, for sure, and why we chose the career paths that we did. One thing about the NIDDK is that it's the 5th largest of this 27 health institutes. There does happen to be a health institute focused on pediatrics. However, it's much, much smaller. Pediatric and rare diseases does not have the same budget like the NIDDK does. So to have the significance of this grant forefront in the NIDDK's mind is a testament to the significance of the opportunity that we have, as well as the focus coming from that institute and seeing how we can change lives through benefiting more children with transplantation. So the last thing is, of course, they're really focused on some of the most expensive diseases in healthcare are related to kidneys, diabetes, and digestive disorders. So that's kind of underscoring how large and how much of competing priorities there's going to be in that institute. So just wanted to be really grateful for them highlighting our work here. So what is Transplants for Kids? Well, first and foremost, it's a collaboration between a private partnership with the private sector, OmniLife. I'm one of the co-founders of OmniLife, and I serve as the research officer. And over the last 6 years, I've been the CTO. I've been our first software engineer along the line with my technical experience. 3 years ago, we met Dr. George Mazarigos and the rest of the Starzl Network at their annual meeting. I think it was maybe their second or third one for the Starzl Network, and we've been working closely with them ever since. Leveraging the immense influence and variety of decision makers and leaders in the pediatric transplant realm within Starzl Network. There's 13 or 14 growing the largest pediatric transplant centers, dedicated pediatric transplant centers in North America that are represented there, and certainly leveraging that experience plus OmniLife's technical capabilities and the University of Iowa Artificial Intelligence Initiative has been extremely important in making this project possible to combine all of those things together. And I think that collaboration is really the biggest win coming out of this project. The project focuses on optimal graft selection algorithms for pediatric liver transplant. We know there are multiple different types of grafts that we can transplant from pediatric for our pediatric candidates, whether they're coming from adults, other infants that are deceased, unfortunately, or we have an opportunity as well to potentially increase living donor transplants for partial livers in our kids and help eliminate the wait list. Some of the issues that we have with waitlist mortality is that it varies quite a bit among pediatric transplant centers, and even some large pediatric transplant centers still suffer large waitlist mortality as well. So we would like to be able to inform the wider Starzl network, but then also the wider entirety of the community, how we can leverage the utilization of other grafts so that we can potentially eliminate pediatric waitlist deaths. Finally, we do this through machine learning predictions that are built upon relevant donor, candidate, offer, and transplant program characteristics. We'll go into more detail there, but combining those variables that are basically very different from one another, they're not usually modeled together, but when we are able to leverage some of the complicated associations with those variables, we might be able to do better predictions. So that's what we're trying to explore in this grant project. Finally, in the future work section, in order to disseminate the results from the algorithms and the optimal graft selection knowledge that we're generating, we would like to do that through real-time clinical decision support, leveraging some of OmniLife's existing software platforms that do communication coordination for procurement and transplant in real time. So really delivering it to the standard of care there. The objective for this project is to create trustable knowledge about different various liver graft types that are available and disseminate that knowledge with clinical decision support, as I detailed before. And we'll go through 3 different aims or sequential aims in order to execute this project, and some of which we're actually doing some work on in the last month or so. So I have the opportunity to present some preliminary results as well. So in aim 1, we're really trying to determine the characteristics required to predict a successful transplant with various different graft types. Partial liver grafts, split liver grafts, which is noted in the first figure on the top of the page here, where you have an opportunity to transplant from a deceased donor to a child as well as an adult, which essentially has an opportunity to extend the donor pool immensely for both pediatric and adult patient pools. And then there's also the other grafts that I mentioned earlier, or variants of the grafts that I mentioned earlier. In aim 2, we're going to use these characteristics that are available from the different domains that I mentioned before to develop predictive models for graft selection, acceptance, and survival. That is, which graft should be selected, or which organ offer, or graft offer should be accepted for transplant, and which ones actually optimize the survival for the child under the specific characteristics that they have at their center, whether the center has large previous experience with technical variants of the grafts or reduced grafts, split liver grafts, and also which type of graft, if there are multiple grafts available or variants thereof, which one would extend the survival benefit for the child the most. And ultimately, should that deceased organ offer be accepted at this time, or should there be an opportunity to wait for a maybe better matched offer in the future? These are all questions that go through surgeon's head at the time of decision making when an organ becomes available, and there's a very short period of time. I think the UNOS and the OPTN give you about 30 minutes to make that decision. So leveraging real-time clinical decision support in this area could potentially help quite a bit to make data-driven decisions for this to optimize our outcomes. And in AIM-3, finally, this is all being done on our computers, of course, and simulating the impact of the decision models on waitlist mortality using the SRTR liver allocation simulation to determine the feasibility. This is an early stage grant, early stage project. Making it work in a computer simulation is the first step to determining that feasibility and potentially making the clinical impact we hope to achieve. As I mentioned before, there are data available from multiple domains that are not combined effectively until we use some nonlinear machine learning options to unlock complex associations between the logistics, the recipient, the donor, and the different program characteristics and the previous experience of the program to determine which graft type is best, as well as which organ offer should be selected for the various graft type, or if there's predicted to be a better graft type available in the future. So leveraging kind of those, to the left, I actually have the 4 different domains, which are a total of 600 or more variables that are available in each of the buckets. By associating them throughout what's depicted here as a neural network association, but it's essentially an opportunity for all the variables to interact multiple times through the different levels of interactions that are available before they need to predict an outcome. And that's notably different from the current statistical methods, where there is a single independent contribution from each variable that we have available. This allows for dependent contributions to happen at the second or third order between different variables to make an impact on the performance of our classifiers and our prediction models. Finally, in the interpretability and trust category, this doesn't make any difference. Doing these models doesn't make any difference if we can't trust them in the clinical setting. So for this stage, like I said, the early stage, we will analyze the simulation and variable importance on the inputs of the models to determine how the model is interacting with the various variables that are available, and produce those reports to influence ways to trust the system as ways to interpretate how things are going as well. Our preliminary results, and this is the second to last slide, so I'm wrapping up here. Our preliminary results show that machine learning algorithms can in fact predict better than traditional statistical methods on held out data. This is important because the data that is available to learn for the algorithms, if they overlearn on those particular data set, it may look like the algorithm is performing very well. However, with held out data set, we can use that data to generalize the performance of the model and how the model would predict unseen circumstances, potentially future organ offers as well, which is obviously the goal. And we did an early result of the simulation is when we applied the models and the algorithms to offers that were received by kids that ultimately died waiting. This means that the kids, or on behalf of the kid, the program declined offers. The models would have predicted that they should have accepted at least one or more of those previous models, and this occurred in the majority of the kids that were waiting on the wait list that declined all of these offers and potentially declined suitable grafts, as would be indicated from our models. So this is an early indication that we're on the right track. It's certainly not the end of our study as well. And finally, the technical variant grafts have an untapped potential. When appropriate donors and recipients are identified and performed by experienced transplant teams, we can extend the waitlist reduction and potential elimination by increasing access to the proper technical variant, the right patient, the right time, with the appropriate surgical experience and transplant team involved. Finally, if technically feasible, which is the goal for the first stage, the second stage is a $1.5 million grant for clinical feasibility to bring this forward into the clinical arena. And certainly by involving all the collaborative people that I mentioned before, this may be possible in the near future. So just big thank you to Starzl Network, to OmniLife, to the support from the NIH, NIDDK, and the Iowa Artificial Intelligence Initiative for their work on transplants for kids. Thank you. There's my email, and looking forward to answering questions at the end of this session.
Thank you very much. That was, I'm as a liver parent myself, I'm sitting here like really geeking out on this. So, so thank you very much. That was amazing. And for those of you watching and listening, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, as we will be going over those here towards the end. Right now, I would like to switch gears and turn it over to Dr. Beau Kelly. And he is from Stanford. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Got it.
Yeah.
But Dr. Kelly is of Stanford Children's Health and SPLIT, the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation. Thank you again for joining us, and I will turn the floor to you.
Well, hopefully we'll give it a go. My apologies again. Let's see. Can you see that all right? Well, let me back up here. All right. Well, thank you all for your patience. And my only request in presenting was that I would not present after Eric or Emily. They're both brilliant and wonderful presenters. So that's what I get for being late. So I'd like to begin by saying a good morning to those on the West Coast and good afternoon to those on the East. And I'd like to thank Jen and Melissa for the opportunity to present innovations in pediatric liver transplantation. As Jen said, I'm Beau Kelly. I'm a pediatric and an adult liver transplant surgeon, and I'm the current president of the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation. And what I'd like to do with you in brief is to discuss innovations in pediatric liver transplantation through the lens of the opportunities that a data registry like SPLIT provides, and how this impacts not only the practice of pediatric liver transplantation, but the possibilities for innovation. So before I dive into it, I just want to say, because it's such a broad audience, I want to set the stage and level the playing field a little bit and describe some of the common threads that bind us all. And I'd like to capture it under the term of a pediatric liver transplantist. And that's right, that's a word that I just created. And it's a term that I would like to say that captures many of the pediatric liver transplant patient, parent, professional, educator, and researcher characteristics. These are people who are engaged in the care of end-stage liver disease and performing liver transplantation. And I think that this common thread encompasses individuals who have unique skills and energy. These are individuals that are very vigilant in their communication and detailed care of children. To match the courage of these children who receive liver transplant, these individuals have to be courageous, and they have to mirror that courage and adventurous pioneering spirit. And to the casual observer, these are individuals who, by just the sheer nature of the disease and circumstances, can appear a little, shall we say, spirited. And not to stereotype, but I would say that these are the generalized characteristics that we all share. Having clarified that, I don't want anybody on this webinar to feel that they are isolated or alone in their passion or circumstances. We all share these feelings and common traits. So my objectives here are to share a brief narrative in the history of the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation and its foundational registry development, and why a database like this can be pivotal in the development of a national and international ecosystem of practitioners seeking to innovate pediatric liver transplantation. I want to briefly discuss how this innovation occurs and how it will continue to impact not only you, your child, but the evolving culture in and around organ donation and pediatric liver transplant. To fully appreciate where pediatric liver transplant innovation can occur from a data registry, I have to give you a little context for the history of SPLIT. So SPLIT, again, is a pediatric liver transplant database, and it began with an advisory board on Valentine's Day of all days in 1995. And this was a consortium of vested pediatric liver transplant individuals. The group was co-chaired by Dr. Samuel So from Stanford and one of my mentors, Dr. Sue McDermott from UCLA. The meeting was attended by a host of notable pediatric liver transplant icons, and their initial interest was in developing a database around hypothesis-driven questions addressing clinical problems that they all saw individually in their respective centers, but had too few patients to generate new standards of care or fundable research. Thus, the Studies of Pediatric Liver Transplant was formed, and the initial SPLIT organization was born. The first iteration was funded by pharmaceutical companies. Subsequently, the registry was able to acquire NIH funding and ancillary grant funding to fuel its various initiatives, collaborations, and manuscript generation. After 2011, the society was the studies were funded by NIH funding. The NIH funding had expired by 2011. And after that time, a new era of center funded support began, and it continues to this day. In 2019, the Studies of Pediatric Liver Transplantation became the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation under a new incorporated structure and tax-exempt status. We then became a subsection of the Transplantation Society. So the SPLIT mission is to improve healthcare access, equity, and outcomes in children receiving liver transplants through our collective research quality improvement initiatives, training and mentoring, and supporting children and their families through education and patient advocacy. We are the international voice of expertise and advocacy for pediatric liver transplantation. As a secondary mission, I'd like to also add that SPLIT serves as an incubator for the development of that next generation of pivotal leaders who will be the preeminent voices for the pediatric transplant community. Our mission is accomplished by gaining new knowledge through observational and translational research and clinical trials, by leveraging the collective data from the SPLIT registry and associated linked databases, by improving care delivery and using new knowledge to reduce variation to promote best practices, by training and mentoring junior physicians, surgeons, allied health professionals, and clinical research coordinators, by advocating for children who require or have received a liver transplant. This is how we get this great work done. The registry, this is a map of obviously of North America, which depicts the locations of our 48 SPLIT registry sites. SPLIT registry sites at present represent centers performing approximately 89% of pediatric liver transplants in the US. Starting back with the SPLIT 3.0 era, following our center-supported funding vehicle, the accrual of consented patients continues to grow annually and is at present upwards of 3,200 pediatric liver transplant recipients. As you've heard, the path of the patient is imperative. So in keeping with the spirit of those original SPLIT meetings, the current registry seeks to input data that tracks every step of a patient through the pre and post-operative transplant process. Much like the scene from The Lion King where Mufasa describes their domain extending to everything that the sunlight touches, as transplant professionals, our responsibility extends to every step of the transplant process that the patient touches. Because it is only in understanding these intricate steps that we have the opportunity to make incremental improvements that will yield exponential results. So how does this innovation occur from a registry structure like splits? In the traditional innovation model, the registry sites contribute data to their respective transplant patient of their respective transplant patients that are then contributed to the post-liver transplant data registry. Split researchers and QI professionals and other interested professionals in the education advocacy can data mine to identify gaps, define actionable complications, and identify predictors of both positive and negative survival outcomes. These research questions then result in publications, practice standards, and quality improvement initiatives that ultimately support policy changes and the implementation of treatment guidelines. This is the long road that results in incremental practice changes that impact our transplant children. So, and as an example, these are results describing various clinical outcome measures for common complications following pediatric liver transplant. The red dots here represent individual split centers and their average number of these various complications. For hepatic artery thrombosis, as an example, and biliary complications, there's a fairly narrow sort of instance of these complications. For other complications, like readmission rates and reoperations after transplant, however, there's a very wide distribution of experiences between transplant centers. And you could easily make the eyeball test that there are some centers that perform better in certain areas than others, and more information about these distinctions could easily and really be really helpful for identifying best practices. So ultimately, the model for data capture at every step of the patient's pathway works well to characterize the step-by-step opportunities for better understanding and improvements. This is most easily demonstrated by the number of research papers and initiatives generated from the various steps within this pathway. This is how the Pahl score was first generated and later improved. And so I won't run through them, but there's a variety of split-generated manuscripts that have documented improvements in every step of the patient pathway. Likewise, as we have stated, incremental improvements in the step-by-step process can lead to exponential outcome improvements. This is seen in this increase in patient survival from 2013 to present, and nearly 8% improvement in survival over the course of this past decade. So what exactly are we building? So with all the emerging capability, what are we really building and that will benefit individual children after transplant? Well, hopefully we're building more capacity for data. We're building a more diverse workforce and strategy to help us integrate and effectively understand our data and its application. And lastly, we're investing in the tools that will be necessary to develop the next generation of transplantists. So in the digital innovation model, and so this would be projecting forward from what you saw as the previous model, this model would contribute, registry sites would contribute their individual data on their patients into the split registry database, and individual principal investigators could go a traditional route wherein they asked specific questions and designed their studies around retrospective data. But then there's also this extended capability and opportunity to institute, as Eric was saying, machine learning and artificial intelligence to drive optimized models to evaluate our predetermined outcomes, or even offer solutions to questions and variable combinations that we've not even considered to this point. This yields learning models that are more efficient in variable modeling and repeated simulation. And this is similar to what Emily was referring to as part of the mandate for the Starzl network. The target audience for the digital innovation model is not only transplant physicians who would then disseminate the information to their institutions and patients, but a simultaneous strategy for leveraging the network effect of community education and early involvement. So now you have this parallel component and option for patients who are able to learn, and the community who are able to learn right along with us as we develop these new, more innovative and digitally networked, the digital networks. Part and parcel with this would be the expansion of our membership. So as part of this digital innovation strategy, there's also the opportunity for expansion of membership beyond registry sites. So Split is engaged in individual Split memberships. Split initiated the individual membership model back in 2019, and we've increased our individual membership by at least 10% every year. We've also increased our international individual memberships to promote diversity of practices and experiences. And so it's through this sharing of experiences more connectively and more connectivity that we'll be able to link in the various networks and data sources. You might ask, well, what about HIPAA compliance and conflicts of interest? Well, these are also areas of opportunity for better innovation. We can no longer use these constraints as excuses for not innovating and sharing our information. How much better would you feel knowing that your team had communicated with individuals worldwide who shared similar experiences and outcomes? So the next generation of Split Data Registry will seek to incorporate and network data from a variety of different sources, such as the UNOS database, the Children's Network database, patient survey data, as well as biobank genetic information that may help us predict better combinations of organs and recipient matches, as well as those who most benefit from transplant. Machine learning can help us integrate data using the models and algorithms that we presently use to get faster and more efficient clinical solutions, while artificial intelligence can help us integrate data to suggest clinical solutions that, again, we may not have even thought of thus far. So what about the crowd? Another area of potential innovation is obviously the patient voice and the patient experience. And so we continue to increase our use of the patient voice in helping us to solve that next series of clinical problems. As an example, you may remember that some of the funniest Super Bowl commercials actually came from contest winners that were solicited from a crowd. NASA, of all places, embarked on a campaign to help them solve some of the most challenging safety issues for returning astronauts safely to Earth. And those solutions came not from NASA astrophysicists, but rather regular, ordinary people who developed simplistic solutions to very complex problems. So the patient voice and experience is imperative in helping us innovate the next answers in pediatric liver transplantation. So let's take a little glimpse into the not so distant future for the practice of pediatric liver transplantation. And referring back to our framework of the path of the patient, the next opportunities for innovation along this pathway start with children's access to the wait list or even getting on this pathway. As I showed you the map of expertise of pediatric transplant centers around the country, there are wide gaps where children live, where they travel great distances to access to tertiary healthcare and to the expertise necessary to recognize their need for transplant healthcare. The next opportunity comes in the form of providing transplants at the time that is just most optimal for children, or just-in-time transplants. This innovation will come in the form of a variety of different organ options. Just-in-time transplant will be a modeling system innovation that gets children transplanted at the time that is most metabolically optimal for the best post-transplant outcome. This involves getting the right organ at the right time. As Eric was stating, this includes options such as expanding living liver donation, brain deceased donation with technical variant grafts that are appropriately allocated and utilized. You, of course, have probably read about the latest advances in xenotransplantation, or using genetically altered pigs to provide organs for transplant. And then lastly, there's 3D printing options where, as you see here, you can have a decellularized liver. That's what this is here. A liver without its liver cells, where the liver cells have been removed, and then that matrix that's left behind can be repopulated with healthy human or genetically altered pig liver cells. Implementation of these advances are actually not that far away. Machine perfusion is another technical advance that allows a liver to be preserved outside of the body. This allows for an ability to better evaluate the function of an organ, to even resuscitate the function of the organ while preserving the underlying structure. This also provides an opportunity for anatomy education and communication about the appropriate recipient. A wealth of data and research can be captured utilizing technologies such as this device. And what you see here is a liver that's implanted into a circuit that then provides blood flow to sustain its function outside of the body. The next area of innovation will have to occur in our investment in training the next generation of transplant professionals, specifically surgical training that encompasses experiences that benefit our smallest patients. The challenging innovation remains our ability to devise ways in which we can attract the best diverse individuals that possess that common thread that we began with. Ability to promote expertise and the real joy of taking care of pediatric liver transplant patients. And this is obviously a complex and time-consuming and energy and resource absorbing venture. And so finding those right individuals is paramount. Structuring environments that not only challenge but foster professional and personal development, and then developing strategies that minimize the ill effects of professional burnout. So I'll say in summary and conclusion that we can conclude that the innovations in pediatric liver transplantation will occur in a variety of ways. But most notably, innovations will occur by sharing data and experiences between transplant professionals and patients. This means inclusion of the patient experience and priorities, and having those experiences built into the models that help us know where to innovate. Improving data capture and integrating data networks, utilizing tools such as machine learning to optimize our models, and artificial intelligence to help us recognize creative solutions and those silent signals that we otherwise may not have identified. And then investing in the next generation of transplantists. So I'll stop there, and I'll thank you again for your attention and this wonderful opportunity to share with you. I welcome any questions.
Questions offline. I did post in the chat area the email address, but it's contact@transplantfamilies.org. So if you want to send your questions there, we'd be happy to answer those and get back to you. I would like to thank the presenters in the audience again for their time. And just know that we will get those unanswered questions answered to you in a timely fashion.